Deputy Speaker, Jessica Tan.
Mr. Speaker, as I was reading the white paper, the experience and emotions were surreal. As I looked back, I can't help but remember my interactions and engagements with residents as they reached out for assistance during the pandemic, which I think I should share some of them. Much has happened over the last 3 years, and what has made it possible for us to be where we are today is the close partnership and trust among all stakeholders: government, agencies, businesses, private and people sectors, and most importantly, Singaporeans and those living in Singapore and interacting with Singapore. We must thank our frontline workers and everyone who contributed, many who worked hard behind the scenes, unknown and unseen, and probably will never be known by many of us, and the many sacrifices that were made in this journey. While we debate on what went right or wrong, let us not miss some key points made in the white paper, which I think are worth repeating. I quote, "On key events and major issues, the lessons to be drawn are quite clear. We need to learn them well and make full use of our experience to prepare Singapore for the next pandemic," unquote. Secondly, what we experienced with COVID-19 was different from SARS, and we can expect that the next pandemic will be different from COVID-19. Hence, we must be prepared for surprises and challenges. While, I quote, "we must learn from the past, there will be a need to adapt and be flexible," unquote. And finally, we should use the lessons captured to help those dealing with the next pandemic, I quote, "to avoid some of the errors we made and improve on what we've done right this time in order to protect the lives and livelihoods of Singaporeans," unquote. And I think it's important to remember the purpose of why we're doing this. It's about lives and livelihoods. The white paper is comprehensive. The PMO team and Mr. Peter Ho, who put it together, have given a good account of our journey through the pandemic, covered the major areas and issues and lessons learned. I will not be able to do justice to the details in the white paper in such a short speech, and I'm not intending to. My speech today will focus on my experience and engagements with residents during the height of the pandemic, the period termed in the white paper as the rocky transition, and the period of learning to live with COVID, the challenges they faced, my learnings, and thoughts on what we could do in terms of engagement and support to better prepare for the next pandemic. In all stages of the pandemic, we must acknowledge that in order to protect lives and livelihoods, it required adapting as the situation changed. This naturally made communication challenging, and with many parties involved, there were many moving parts to deal with. And things did get complex and at times confusing for individuals and their families. On balance, as outlined in the white paper, we maintain effective, timely, and accurate communication with channels like the Multi-Ministry Task Force press conferences, dedicated gov.sg WhatsApp channel, timely sharing of information, both good and bad, as well as outlining of plans. These played a major role in maintaining public trust. The efforts to ensure the countering of misinformation and scams and corrective actions like POFMA prevented the spread of falsehood and panic amongst our people. We must give credit that public communication was well managed overall. But as with all things, there were challenges related to the access of information or clarity, and that affected individual situations, which did have ramifications on their movement, access to services, and safety. Communications was not easy given that there was constant change and need for adaptation. So to illustrate the point, let me give some examples, and this is not exhaustive, of appeals for help that I receive from residents. These examples would just give a sense of the challenges faced with the last mile of communication. So example one, I had a resident who needed help with test results and status, as well as update on the Trace Together app status. She made numerous attempts to call the MOH hotline to seek clarity, but was unsuccessful over the course of more than a week. And even when she did get her call answered, the persons who handled her call were unable to advise her or gave her conflicting information. Why did she need the information? Was because she was required to provide her employer the information, as it was more than 9 days that she had been away from work. Example two, this example related to vaccination status on the Trace Together app. For this resident, after receiving the second vaccination, his vaccination status was not updated. Even after waiting for 2 weeks after the second vaccination and sending the query form as directed by the website and calling the hotline, he was informed that nothing could be done and that the matter was being escalated. When the resident reached out to me, it was already a month. With vaccination differentiated safe management measures, or VDS, he was unable to gain access to most places, as his Trace Together app indicated that his vaccination was in progress. These examples related to vaccination and the Trace Together app, but there were similar situations because of the changes with regards to quarantine and isolation measures, or SMM, or border measures. So in the spirit of learning from our experience and what concrete actions that we can take to better prepare for future pandemics and to help us deal with other national crises, I would like to make some recommendations. I agree with lesson 7 of the white paper, which outlined the importance of continuing to deliver transparent and clear public communication to build trust and ensure effective response in a crisis. From the examples that I share, there is also a need for channels of effective two-way communications and engagement for support and help when individual situations required it. The white paper rightly outlined that we should have directed more resources to frontline crisis communication, especially at case management and the need for tight information flow between the various stakeholders. I agree, and I recommend that we should also consider bringing this closer to the community and build structures and capability in peacetime to achieve this. What do I mean by this? Well, while directing more resources is required, from past experience, we have seen that even with more resources directed, it is not always possible or sustainable to resource support for peak loads. As DPM Wong had said in his speech, realistically, we can plan or invest, but we cannot plan for every situation. So I'm proposing that, one, we identify and designate and set up in peacetime trusted nodes of frontline crisis communication by areas or by constituencies closer to the community. Establish standard operating procedures, or SOPs, of communication with residents and channels of engagement and points of contacts. Example, number to call, email addresses, and WhatsApps. Establish SOPs for two-way communication, appropriate engagement between the nodes and agencies, including the latest information updates, and engagement between the nodes and Establish SOPs for two-way communication and appropriate engagement between the nodes and agencies, including latest information updates and escalation handling. This will enable not just communication of information to the public, but also facilitate the resolution of issues faced by individuals and channels of feedback for changing needs within the community to agencies. Just like business continuity plans, there is a need to also conduct regular exercises to activate these nodes of frontline crisis communications and involvement of all stakeholders, including the community, all stakeholders, including the community, in testing of communication flows among stakeholders and for familiarization. And just to be clear, what I mean by community is including residents, including citizens, so that they get familiar with the nodes of communication. While my recommendations are not novel, and parts of this already exist, what I'm proposing is a deliberate move to forward plan as DPM Wong had said earlier, and put in place a network and system for frontline communication, crisis communication closer to the community that is regularly exercised and tested so that we can activate them during a pandemic or any other national crisis. Mr. Speaker, the 3 years of dealing with COVID-19 demanded a lot from our people, organizations, and government. It took our resilience as one people, public and private sector, civil society, and strong leadership to protect lives and livelihoods that brought us to this new normal. I am confident that as one people, and with our learnings from our COVID-19 journey, we will be able to work together to better prepare ourselves for the next pandemic and future crisis. Mr. Speaker, I support the motion.